So, what comes next for Super Nintendo? It probably seems like a bit of a strange topic considering that Super Nintendo's been long dead since, like I said, 2003 if you're in Japan, or 1999 here in the West. So really, I'm not expecting much more in the realm of official new Super Nintendo stuff. Uh, and that doesn't mean it's not gonna like have anything, like no new official things happening for it. Um, because there is still merchandise coming out. I could have an official SNES shirt, but a lot of them are so expensive for whatever reason. And of course, there's still going to be new games added to the SNES service on Switch Online. I talked about the SNES Classic, and I would love to see more units of those be released, but I figure that ship's sailed since there's no more Wii accessories being released either, and the SNES and NES Classic editions used the Wii remote connectors for it, so you'd need the controllers for it. But like I said, the official scene for the SNES isn't really the interesting thing. To me, the interesting thing that will be in the Super Nintendo's future is all the unofficial stuff. And there's still games coming out for the SNES, whether it's ROM hacks. There's a ton of Super Mario World ROM hacks. There's a ton of Link to the Past ROM hacks. Now I can't say a ton about it because I actually haven't done. I don't think I've played a single ROM hack, which is kind of shocking. You'd think that I would want to play a ROM hack of Super Mario World just to have more of that game in my life, and I I haven't gotten around to doing something like that. But there's still plenty of famous hacks. Of course, when we're talking Mario World, we have to talk about Kaizo Mario, which is so hard. I'm sure. I have not played it, but I've watched plenty of it, and it looks real hard. There's actually not a lot of Donkey Kong Country ROM hacks, which would be the ones that I'm more interested in. There's like there's this boss blitz one, but that's kind of lame because it's just a boss rush. Which if I wanted to play all the bosses in a row, I would just boot up a 100% save file of a file of Donkey Kong Country that was finished, I should say. I mean, there's ROM hacks like The Legend of Zelda Parallel Worlds. And then there's, of course, the straight-up homebrew games that people make of completely original stuff for the SNES. There's aftermarket accessories, aftermarket consoles, because one day, sadly, this console is going to die on me, and so if I want to continue playing these cartridges, I need something else that'll let me play them. And actually, there's some companies that are even going out and reprinting games. I know I Am 8-Bit made new copies of Mega Man X in a special... I want to say it was in a blue cartridge, but I don't remember. I know Mega Man 2, they also reprinted that on the NES, and that had some new cartridges. Of course, you are also going to see things like old stuff getting rediscovered, things that prototypes for games that were originally going to end up coming out on the Super Nintendo, but ended up not coming out. I know last year there was... Cooley Skunk, which is another one of those. Like I said, there are actually a lot of platformers on the SNES, but they're all like mascot sort of things that may not be quite as good. And one of those was Cooley Skunk, which ended up turning into Punky Skunk on the original PlayStation. That just happened to be found in January of 2020. I can't say that I've heard a ton of things since then, but I know that that's one that stuck out to me as an SNES game that ended up being unearthed from the prototype Purgatory. That's a good phrase, prototype Purgatory. But perhaps the most frustrating thing with the future of the SNES is that it really hasn't had much of a legacy, I would argue. You know, in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, especially on digital fronts, you saw the 8-bit retro revival. And nowadays, I would argue there's still 8-bit retro revival games coming out, but now we're kind of moving into the retro 3D PS1 N64 revival. But the 16-bit era, I would argue, was pretty close to skipped over. And maybe I'm being unfair in saying that because this could just be a personal issue for me because I would classify a lot of retro revival games that are definitely supposed to be 8-bit games to look a lot more like 16-bit games. Like if you show me a picture of like Shovel Knight or Blaster Master Zero, they look way more like 16-bit games than 8-bit games. If only because like they use way more colors than the NES could make in a single image. They're also there's no sprite flickering, and sprite flickering still happened in SNES games, but it wasn't quite as often as you'd see in an NES game. And that's not to say that there's no games that exist today that are 16-bit inspired. Of course, you look at independent games like there's Freedom Planet here. That is most definitely a 16-bit inspired game. Although I would argue it's more of a Genesis inspired game than it is a Super Nintendo inspired game. Then there's its sequel, which is eschewing for more of a 32-bit aesthetic, coming out when it's done. uh, there's new games, like there's this new game, Kaze and the Wild Masks, that I want to pick up. Not only does it actually look similar to a 16-bit game, it's actually inspired by Donkey Kong Country to the point where you can find bonus rooms all around the place, and you can bet it's going to be in my collection one of these days. Even then, something as simple as Super Mario Maker and Super Mario Maker 2 here, that carried on the legacy of Super Mario World because it's a theme in the game. Dragon Quest XI-S, that's another game where you can play it in 2D mode. And you're not playing it in 2D mode inspired by the NES, the Famicom Dragon Quest games. No, it looks 16-bit. And while I would much rather play it in the 3D mode, because that's what I have played it in, you can still play it in 2D if you want. And if I were to ever play it again, it's going to be in the 2D mode, just to see how all is different. Actually, I guess I'm kind of curious if folks consider, say, the RPG Maker games to be 16-bit inspired games. Because if you look at the base RPG Maker aesthetic with like all the knights and the sprites and all that stuff, it just screams 16 bits. Like, I mean, I would count it in that sense, but I think they're a little more up in the air because they certainly don't have 16-bit style music, Super Nintendo or Genesis style, unless, I'm sure there's someone who would go out of their way to make 16-bit style music, but I haven't seen them. And there are RPG Maker games again that use that 16-bit style aesthetic. I think of like there's this newer game Arafel, which is supposed to be 16-bit inspired. Of course, I played To the Moon last year. That's a fantastic 16-bit looking game, even though it certainly does things that you could not do in the SNES. So I don't know. I don't know. I guess the lesson in talking about the question of whether there was a 16-bit retro revival that I got from writing about this, thinking about it, talking about it, is that I guess I was a little miffed that there wasn't a formal 16-bit retro revival, in that you didn't just see a bunch of 16-bit games come out all at once. But I think instead of that conventional revival, it seems like 16-bit games just continued to come out after the Genesis and Super Nintendo lives were over. And in some ways, I don't know, maybe that's even better than having a brief era of, we're going to have nostalgia for the Super Nintendo and here's a bunch of games and now it's kind of over. So I think that concludes my discussion of the SNES today. So I just want to knock a couple more of these over and so I can pull it up and inevitably wish a happy birthday to this fine piece of hardware I have sitting next to me. It's 30 years strong, and I hope to see it continue on, even though I know one day these games are just going to have to be played digitally because all the consoles and the cartridges are going to die. So, happy 30th anniversary, Super Nintendo. That covers what I had to say today, and normally, like I would in every episode, I'd talk about how long this is going to be, and I don't really know if I'm going to be able to say that. It's a lot more challenging because later on when the semester and fall starts, I'm going to have to record an intro, but, at least I've been doing this for about an hour and a half, so please, folks, do all of your engagement, typical things depending on your platform. I look forward to continuing along with the Creative Outlet Birthday Extravaganza, or Gaming Birthday Extravaganza, I mean to say. That was our SNES talk. This is Brandon Pudwell signing out for the Creative Outlet Podcast. Thank you much.